Good evening and welcome to the American Turkish Association of Washington, D.C., commonly known as ATA DC's cultural webinar for Turkish Heritage Month. Usually each year there is a Turkish festival. However, due to COVID-19, there will be several events throughout October for Turkish Heritage Month, including this particular cultural webinar. I am your host, Shayla Irtigun, and also a board member of ATA-DC. ATA-DC is an all-volunteer, nonprofit organization dedicated to sponsoring cultural events and educating young and old about Turkish culture and history. This particular presentation tonight is called Tea Lives, A Journey Through Turkey's Tea Culture. Our presenter is Pelin Aylangan. She started the Tea in Turkey project out of her desire to promote a positive image of Turkey. She has been researching, writing, and speaking about tea and Turkish culture since 2005 through programs with Smithsonian and articles in Turkish and American magazines. She is the former president of the ATA-DC and Secretary General of the Assembly of Turkish American Associations. She currently leads partnership development for the experience management company Qualtis and resides in Seattle, Washington. Without further ado, here is our presenter, Pelin Aylangan.
Thanks, Shayla. Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'd like to thank ATA DC for organizing and hosting this webinar series and continuing, despite the situation with COVID-19, to bring Turkish culture to everyone living in the United States, and maybe we've got some folks joining from abroad. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start the presentation. Shayla, if you could just confirm that you can see it.
Yes, I can see it.
Wonderful, great. So for the next hour, we're going to take a journey through Turkey's tea culture. The format of the presentation will be in 3 sections. After each section, we'll pause and give you a chance to ask some questions. There is a Q&A window that you can answer or leave your questions in as well, and we'll try to cover as many of them as possible. So some quick fun facts. Did you know that Turkey is the world's 6th largest producer of tea? And that tea was first cultivated in Turkey in the late 1800s, and we'll talk a little bit about the history. Currently, there are more than 200 families involved in the production of tea along the Black Sea region of Turkey. That's 200,000 families. Imagine about 3 people per family, perhaps close to 1 million people in Turkey whose livelihoods depend on tea. And that Turks lead the world in per capita consumption of tea. To give you a sense of how much tea we drink, compared to other countries, Turks drink 6.96 pounds, close to 7 pounds per person. Our nearest rival is the Irish and UK. And look down that list at China. You would imagine that the Chinese drink lots of tea. It's certainly the leader in terms of world production, but lower on the scale in terms of consumption per person. So how did Turkey come to be the world's largest consumer of tea when you might expect that Turkey is just known for its coffee? So let's talk a little bit about the history. And by the way, I hope you all have your own glass of Turkish tea, as I have mine, as you're listening to this presentation. Tea is so instrumental and so central to Turkish cultural life that we have a saying, a conversation without tea is like a night sky without the moon. And throughout this presentation, you'll see how tea permeates every aspect of Turkish social life and how the instruments and tools and equipment that we use for tea is used throughout Turkish society. So tea actually came to Turkey in the late 1800s. Sultan Abdülhamit II actually had tea brought from Japan, and they tried to plant it in Bursa in the late 1800s. As you know, Bursa is close to Istanbul on the western side of Turkey, but the environment just was not conducive, and so it was not successful. We fast forward to the early 1900s in Rize along the Black Sea region, as you see a picture here. It was really some agricultural engineers who started the effort and believed that the Black Sea region of Turkey was fertile and ripe for, and very conducive for growing tea, hazelnuts, and various other crops in an environment where the economic situation wasn't very promising. A lot of the men who lived in the Black Sea region had migrated to towns like Zonguldak for coal mining. They had gone to Istanbul to be fishermen. And so a lot of women were left in the Black Sea region having to really subsist on very little crops. The father of the Turkish tea industry is this gentleman that you see here, Zihni Derin. This is a statue of him at the Tea Institute in Rize on the Black Sea region. It was really this gentleman who led the effort by the agricultural engineers who worked for the Turkish government and wanted to bring tea to Turkey. In fact, they were so passionate about it that in 1924, in Turkey, the Tea Act was passed. It was actually passed into law saying that this, plant should be grown in the Black Sea region along with things like hazelnuts and so forth. Now, the challenge that the engineers had, although they were passionate about it and they knew that this crop could actually grow in the Black Sea region, they had to convince the women in the Black Sea region that they should turn their land into these little tea plantations. One of the things that they had to do was to make sure that they shaped the land into these steppes, as you see here along the hills along the Black Sea region, to plant the Camellia senescens plant, which is what all tea comes from. So these engineers set out and they went town by town to try to convince the women. You'll notice in this picture here that it's mostly women who are amongst the tea bushes, to turn their small little family plots into these little tea fields. And as the tea began to grow and people saw that they could actually make a living from this, it became more and more popular. It became so popular that across the Black Sea region and the Black Sea coast, as you see on this map here, towns actually started changing their names to include the word chai, which is a tea in Turkish. So you'll see that we have a town called Çayeli, Çaykent, and Çaykara. And more Turkish families along the Black Sea coast began to rely on tea for their livelihood, to what we have today, as I mentioned in the introduction, over 200,000 families from Trabzon all the way to Artvin, close to the Georgian border, involved in the planting, cultivation, harvesting, and working in the tea factories and making their livelihood from tea. Now what happens is that tea is harvested 4 times a year, starting in May, and it's mostly the women who are involved in the harvest. You can see the women here along the Black Sea region. They're usually waist high within the tea bushes, and they will use these little kind of shears that have bags attached to them to cultivate and harvest the tea 4 times a year. Again, because the story of tea started with women in the Black Sea region, to this day, it's mostly women who work in the fields. They get up early while there's still dew on the plants and will harvest the tea. The key to this is that they have to cut off the top 2.5 leaves from the tea plants. That is the best part of it. And as they cut, those leaves continue to grow back for the next harvest. And you can see a close-up here of the shears and how quickly they cut into their bags. And this is just another picture of how dense the hills of the Black Sea region are. If you ever get a chance to go or have been there, you'll see that just about every hill, in some cases they've even taken as over cemeteries, are full of these tea bushes. Some of these hills are very high and very steep. And so there's actually kind of this system whereby once the tea is collected into those small bags and then transferred into the larger bushels, that they are transported up and down these hills to areas where they are collected and then sent on for processing. 95% of the tea that is cultivated in Turkey is grown in and around Rize, R-I-Z-E. That is the capital of the tea cultivation in Turkey. You'll see that once the tea is collected, it's further carried into these large, kind of bushels and bags and pushed to the collection stations. These collection stations are simple kind of concrete, cement wall, wall little buildings where the tea is dumped, and the tea experts from the various tea factories, there are both government-owned factories as well as private factories, such as those owned by Lipton or some of the other Turkish firms. They will come to these tea collection stations, again, there's 3,000 of them in the Black Sea region, to analyze the tea, make sure those leaves are of high quality, and very quickly transfer them to the factories for processing. And you'll see the tea leaves here have arrived at the factory. Once they arrive, the tea at this point, these leaves are about 95% water. So if you think about from the time that they are collected from those small bushes to the time that they have to be processed, because the longer they wait, the faster the quality deteriorates. They will have to get processed through that factory as quickly as possible, and the water needs to come out of those leaves. Throughout the Black Sea region, there are nearly 50 factories that produce tea. These generally operate 24 hours a day during the tea season, which runs from May until the end of September. You'll see that after the leaves have been dumped from those trucks onto these conveyor belts, they start their journey of being processed into what we know and what we purchase as the loose leaf tea. Those leaves, they're withered, they're dried. You can see that they start to kind of take on what we're familiar as, or what was familiar to us as kind of loose leaf tea. And in Turkey, those tea leaves, depending on the quality of them, how much they've been dried, they get separated into 7 different bags that then get further packaged into different types of tea that is marketed throughout Turkey based on kind of local palates and tastes. So what they drink in Istanbul might be different than what they drink in southeastern Turkey. So let me pause there. Shayla, do we have any questions so far?
Yes, we do. We have one question from Linda Hassan. Has the Rize tea industry advanced with technology, as it appears the transportation is based on hard labor?
That's a very great question. The manual labor of harvesting and picking the tea, that still exists. I was there about 7, 8 years ago. It's still transported on those trucks. Men, as you saw in that picture, will rake it off the trucks onto those conveyor belts. Once it enters the processing factory, the manual labor is pretty light. But once it then starts going into packaging and labeling, there is some light automation that has occurred. In terms of Turkey's kind of place in terms of tea innovation, I happened to be in Turkey when they started producing green tea, which still comes from the same plant. It's just not withered and dried and fermented as much as black tea. There is a tea research institute that is based in Rize, which continues to conduct research on tea and innovate in terms of products. But if you look at the factories, the machinery there still looks a little bit old, and there's still a lot of manual labor involved. Great question.
Our next question is from Kenan Yilmaz. Is Turkey exporting tea?
Yes, Turkey does 95 or most of the tea that's manufactured in Turkey stays for domestic consumption, as you'll see throughout the rest of the presentation. But given the large expat Turkish community, it is exported to Çaykur, which is the ministry, Turkish Ministry of Tea, if you will. They do export their products to Germany, here to the United States, and Australia, and some other countries as well. But most of the tea that's produced in Turkey is kept for domestic consumption.
The next question, what percent is export?
Export, it's pretty small. I would say it's probably 15%. I'd have to check on the numbers, but I know the majority of it is maintained for domestic consumption.
And there is another question. What would be the difference among those 7 bags going to the different regions if it's all called chai?
Excellent question. So as the tea goes through the factory, it is dried and shredded. I don't have a picture of the shredders, but imagine this big shredder that's just crushing those leaves. And they do them at various degrees. And so how much that tea is dried and oxidized and the water pulled out of it, how big the leaves are, determines which bag they end up into. So for example, the tea that ends up in bag number 7, it basically looks like sand or sawdust. And that's actually sold to Lipton to make iced tea for the powdered iced tea that Lipton sells.
The next question, you can find a variety of tea here in the United States. Do Turks like drinking different flavors of tea?
So there has been a rise in Turkey, probably in the last 10 years, of lots of herbal teas, which are made from different plants. The one variation that we have on black tea is Earl Grey. Just a quick fun fact, the way you make Earl Grey tea is you add a bergamot essence to black tea, and that's what gives you Earl Grey. But in terms of things like Darjeeling and oolong and things like that, Turks like to stick to the hardcore black tea, as you see me drinking here tonight.
How much of Turkish tea marketed by Turkish firms and how much is being sold into blends for global firms like Lipton, which you mentioned earlier?
I don't have that statistic. That's a very good question. I do know that there are foreign firms that are operating along the Black Sea coast, such as Lipton, some of the larger kind of Turkish tea companies. One of them was recently purchased by Coca-Cola to kind of get a foothold into the Turkish market when it comes to tea. But I'm not sure how much of it is sold to other companies like Twinings or some of the other brands that we know throughout the world.
And the last question, is Gunpowder brand a Turkish tea?
It is not. Gunpowder, I believe, is Chinese.
Great questions. There aren't any more at the moment.
Excellent. Okay, so let's go on to the culture of tea. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the instruments that we use to drink tea, places where you can drink tea, and how we as Turks enjoy tea in Turkey throughout the day and throughout our lives. So one of the oldest ways to brew tea is the samovar. Now the samovar originated in the Caucasus. It made its way into Turkey through population migrations. It's actually made of 2 different sections. The top part is where you have the steeped tea, and then the bottom part is where you have the boiling water. Now the interesting thing is that in Turkey, there are two towns. You'll see them both here on the map. The first one is called Vezirköprü, and the second one is Amasya, which is where my grandmother is from. These two towns are the headquarters or the capital of samovar making within Turkey. So if you're interested in samovars, I would highly recommend that you visit either Vezirköprü or Amasya to really taste and experience samovar culture. If you walk into kind of the main shopping district or trade area within Vezirköprü, as you see here, you'll see some of the more modern samovars being made. And here's another picture of them. These are still used throughout Turkey. Sometimes you might see them in the farmers markets. You may see them used in some of the businesses. Families may still use them. One of the interesting things about the samovar is it's portable. It's powered by coal. Some of them are even electric. And families still carry these around or may use them in their courtyards, in their backyards to make tea. Rarely used within the house, but they are used outside. Here you can see a samovar craftsman making kind of one of these older style samovars. Typically, these craftsmen will make about 12 to 14 samovars per day out of various metals. And again, if you go to either Vezirköprü or Amasya, you will see samovars being made. Now in this picture, this is actually a picture of my grandmother and grandfather there on the left side. You'll see that they are on a family picnic. And in the middle of the picnic area there is their samovar. This is the probably, let's see, 1930s. And it was very common for families, here we kind of see what might look like a bachelor party with gentlemen who have taken a very fancy samovar to their outdoor gathering. And so this was a common way to enjoy tea outside of the house. Today, however, in Turkey, we still use kind of the dual method. We just don't use samovars. If you walk into any Turkish kitchen, either here in the United States or in Turkey, you will most likely see this double teapot. Now, the benefit of this is that you can drink your tea very steeped and very dark by just pouring the steeped tea from the top teapot. Or if you like it a little lighter, you can definitely add the water that is boiling in the lower pot. And these teapots, by the way, are available on Amazon if anybody is interested in having Turkish tea at home. Now, how do we drink tea? As you saw earlier, I've got my tea glass here. The tulip-shaped glass is we call it ince belli, which translates to thin-waisted Turkish tea glass. This is the most common way. These tea glasses are ubiquitous in Turkey. Turks buy like 300,000 or 3 million of these, excuse me, a year. You will see them in every Turkish household. You'll see them in the tea gardens and tea houses. The traditional style was like this, but, it is so popular in Turkey that there have even been poems written in homage to the Turkish tea glass. As our famous poet Can Yücel wrote, that perhaps with time, her slim waist would have become a memory if damn tea was not served in a slim-waisted glass. He's obviously referring to a former lover or a girlfriend, and every time that he drank tea from a tea glass, the slim-waisted or ince belli, he was reminded of his former girlfriend. This tea glass is so common in Turkey that we use it as a unit of measure. If you look at Turkish recipes, you will see that it says a tea glass of sugar, a tea glass of flour, a tea glass of milk. That's what we use versus the cup that you might be familiar with. Now, what's happened over time is that the tea glass has changed shape. It's gotten fatter. As you see here on the right, it's gotten taller. And if you go to Turkey today, you can see a wide variety of tea glasses that are for sale throughout the Egyptian Spice Bazaar. in the covered bazaar. If you go into Paşabahçe, which is our leading glass manufacturer, you will see all sorts and sizes of tea glasses that can suit your preference. And you'll see, this is some of the photography for my book that hopefully will get out next year, but various sizes, and they've definitely changed over time. This shape is unique to Turkey. I've traveled to other countries and I have not seen kind of the tulip shaped glass in other countries. You know, in Morocco, it's slightly different. It's pretty unique to Turkey. Now, with the growth of tea culture, Turkey, one of the occupations that came about was the çaycı, or the young gentleman who serves tea. If you walk throughout the streets of Turkey today, in any town, even in some of the villages and in the large cities, you'll generally see a gentleman who are walking with this kind of three-pronged tray with a handle throughout the streets, delivering tea. Here in the capital, Ankara, in the historic district, the çaycı taking tea to the various shop owners and their guests. It is customary that when you're shopping in Turkey, especially if you're shopping for rugs or in the covered bazaar, that you will be offered a glass of tea. The çaycıs are typically young men or older men. Women usually do not do this job in Turkey, but you'll see here on the left, in order to keep the tea warm, he's got a covered tray. And again, on the right, another gentleman in Ankara taking these crimson tea-filled glasses to shop owners throughout the day. And here along the İznik lake in Turkey, close to Bursa and Istanbul, we have the young çaycı delivering tea to a family who's enjoying the sunset by the lake. In order to understand how tea became so popular in Turkey, you actually have to go back and look at the coffee houses. Here's a picture of a traditional one from Istanbul in the early 1800s. As you know, coffee was much more popular. The Ottomans served coffee in the palaces. Tea was really not served. It was only used for medicinal purposes. But as Iranians came, or Persians came into Turkey, Russians came into Turkey in the late 1800s, across from the main post office in Istanbul, the first small tea house was opened. It was after that that really the tea houses started spreading through the Beyazıt district in Turkey. These were places where people could go, not just to drink tea, but to listen to poetry, to read books. And sometimes these tea houses even had rooms for rent above them, where young gentlemen who came to Istanbul looking for work could stay. Unfortunately, those first tea houses that popped up throughout the Beyazıt district of Istanbul do not exist today. They've been replaced by more modern ones, but that area of Istanbul was really the place where the tea houses flourished. Today, if you walk the streets of Istanbul, you'll see almost these little holes in the wall called the çay evi, or the tea house. Very simple, nothing fancy to them. Usually just one or two people working and just serving tea day in and day out. They typically do not serve food alongside that. So if you are going to visit a çay evi, or as we'll see later with the tea gardens, you definitely want to take your own pastries with you. This is the mural on a wall in a traditional tea house in Ankara in the historic district. Here, this is the high plateaus of the Black Sea region. You'll see any place we can construct something and serve tea, Turks will do it. So this is kind of a ramshackle place high in the hills where people can stop for tea. And this is a more modern one in the Kadıköy district of Istanbul. This is actually run by Çaykur, as I mentioned. They are the Ministry of Tea in Turkey. they had a big effort to open a series of tea houses or çay evi where Turks could come and enjoy the full range of teas that Çaykur produces. If you travel into eastern Turkey towards kind of the Georgian border, this is a town close to Erzurum called Pasinler. It is one of the oldest tea houses in Turkey. A family has owned it throughout the years. I know you can't see it in this photograph, but the sign in the window says that tea is free for soldiers who may be on leave. Now, the interesting thing about these traditional tea houses is that gentlemen who live in that town or village will visit the tea house every day. And in this particular tea house, they actually use one of the boards within the building to keep track of how many glasses of tea each individual has had. And at the end of the month, they kind of, they square up the bill and everybody pays. This town, the gentlemen happen to be farmers, mostly working, with agriculture. And so once they're able to sell their crops at the markets, then they will pay off or pay down their tea tab. And as you'll see, I had the opportunity to visit this tea house, and in the short time that I was there, I actually ran up a bill for 5 glasses of tea. We have a style of drinking tea, mostly in Eastern Turkey, and it is from kind of the Russian influence. My grandfather used to drink tea this way, and it's called kutlama. You'll see here that the sugar that's used is it's a harder sugar. It is comes in blocks that you cut with something that looks like, cutters or pliers. And the way you drink tea is to place that little cube of sugar into your cheek and to drink maybe 2 or 3 glasses of tea with that one little sugar cube. And it's called kutlama. You won't see this style in some of the larger cities or in Western Turkey. It's something that is more indigenous to the eastern towns in Turkey, particularly in the Erzurum and Kars areas in eastern Turkey. So where do we like to enjoy tea? The concept of tea gardens really started in Turkey in the 1950s. Before, as tea started in Istanbul in those tea houses, they were mostly the domain for men. But when tea gardens started coming about, it was a place where families could go out together, and men and women and children could enjoy tea in a very kind of, I would say, kind of family environment and out in public. This is a picture of Emirgan in Istanbul in the 1950s. I had the opportunity to interview people who grew up during that period, and they said that it was, families who were well-to-do would get into their cars, they would drive to Emirgan, and it was considered a very kind of high society thing to do to go to a tea garden. This is that same tea garden in 1955. You'll notice that people are there just to drink tea. Food is not served. And that tea garden exists to this day. It looks a little bit more modern than what you see here, but you'll see people are in their fanciest clothes going to a tea garden. Here's another picture of a family at a tea garden. The furniture is usually very simple. This family has ordered tea in a samovar because they'll probably be there a long time. And again, a picture of another family at a tea garden as well. Now, one of the most popular things that we like to eat alongside tea in Turkey is the simit. The simit originated out of the palace kitchens. Typically, that's what would happen during the Ottoman period, that a lot of food was tested in the Ottoman kitchens, and some of it ended up becoming street food. You'll see here pictures of the simit. These are sesame rings, the simit sellers in Istanbul. They used to produce or bake simit 5 times a day, and it would be sold throughout the streets. It became our go-to kind of street food Here you see a simit bakery in the Galata district of Istanbul. Simit and tea in Turkey sometimes constitutes a meal for a lot of people, but we can't imagine drinking tea without having simit alongside it. You'll still see today simit sellers walking the streets of Turkey, especially in some of the older neighborhoods. It still comes out morning, afternoon as well, because we still have this tradition in Turkey of 5 o'clock tea, which I'll talk about. One of the things that became very popular in Turkey, especially in the Pera district of Istanbul, was this idea of the 5 o'clock tea, very similar to how the British observe it. And in high society in Istanbul, women had their special, their kind of designated days for their 5 o'clock tea. It became such a fancy ritual that women had special invitations printed announcing their 5 o'clock tea, and people would go from almost mansion to mansion within Istanbul enjoying 5 o'clock tea with much fancier, as you can see, porcelain ware, still using the traditional tea glasses. They were probably just crystal instead of regular glass ones, but very fancy pastries, and it was really a way for the upper class to enjoy tea. They still drank the same black tea. It's not like they were importing tea. It's just there was much more ritual and a fancy and flair to that event. Here you can see a women's 5 o'clock tea party. Again, you'll see the samovar in the background. Here, the American College for Girls was having tea on a Saturday in 1963 to celebrate and in honor of one of their new members of the faculty. And here is an invitation from 1974. So this is the boys' high school in Istanbul, and they are inviting their members, their family members, to enjoy their annual tea talk, if you will. So tea became a very common way for Turks to gather, whether it was in tea houses, in gardens, or as part of formal events, like you see here with this invitation. Okay, so let me pause there and see if there are any questions about the culture of tea and how we drink tea in Turkey.
Yes, there are several questions. Firstly, when is your book coming out?
Great question. So I hope to publish it next year. Since I work full-time, it's a little difficult to switch between corporate life and doing something creative like this. But we've got all of the photography done. The editing has been done. It's just a matter of pulling it all together and sending it to the printers. I'll share some more information at the end and how you can stay on top of that. But I hope to have it out next year.
Hopefully I pronounced this right, but the Imsebel looks similar to the teacup of Morocco. Is there any connection?
I have not been able to find a connection. I suspect that there's probably a heavy influence. Even when I researched when did that tea, that incebelli glass first come about in Turkey, tea glasses were produced or manufactured in Turkey starting in the 1930s. And I have seen pictures of women having tea from those glasses in the 1930s. So during the Ottoman era, those tea glasses in that shape really did not exist. Was there influence across, the Middle East, across countries? Possibly, but I have not been able to find that direct connection.
In the US, there is a social stigma that tea is more feminine. What is your view about this difference?
Not in Turkey at all. Everybody, young kids, men, women, everybody drinks tea equally, and we all drink it from the same glass. It's not like in Turkey you would find women drinking it from a glass and men drinking it from a mug. You may see, a gentleman drinking tea from a very dainty tea glass. It's just so central to our culture and identity that we don't distinguish between whether it's a masculine drink or a feminine drink.
Yes. How does the Starbucks coffee culture fit into the Turkish tea culture?
You know, it's very interesting. We have Starbucks throughout Turkey. They have lots of seating because one of the things that you will not see in Turkey is somebody grabbing a cup of tea or a glass of, you know, a cup of coffee or a glass of tea and walking on the street and drinking with it. In fact, in Turkey, we kind of consider it rude to eat and walk at the same time. So our culture is heavily focused on sitting and enjoying your drink. So the Starbucks in Turkey have seating sometimes for 50, 60 people compared to, you know, the small cafes that we have here in the United States. It's certainly become very popular as a hangout place, especially for, you know, the young generation, but there is still a strong commitment throughout Turkey, young and old, men and women, younger generation, older generation, to just having a good glass of Turkish tea.
Are other herbs added to the tea in the incebele, like mint?
We don't add mint directly to it. We do have, if you've been a tourist to Turkey, you might find that sometimes you're served apple tea. Sometimes foreigners find the black tea that we drink a little too strong, so there's apple tea, but it's not apple added to the black tea, it's a whole separate drink. We do have a whole category of herbal teas that are different, you know, chamomile tea. When we have mint tea, it's usually just mint and lemon without the black tea in it. We kind of like our black tea, just hardcore black tea. We don't add milk to it. You saw in one of the pictures, sometimes lemon is added to it as well, sometimes honey, but usually it's just pure black tea with nothing added to it, including other herbs.
How hot should the water be, and how long should tea uh, be? I think levered, be steeped.
Be steeped. Okay. So when you have the double teapot, first thing you do is bring the water to a full boil. You have the tea leaves in the upper teapot, and so you pour that boiling water into the upper teapot. Usually, you know, steeping it for 7 to 10 minutes is ideal. The longer you steep it, obviously, the darker it's going to be. But you want to bring that water to a full boil. You know, I had the chance to speak to someone in Argentina a few weeks ago about their mate tea, and they don't bring it to a full boil when they're making their mate. In Turkey, we bring the water to a full boil. We let it steep. Now, if you let it steep long, that's okay. You're going to have a dark tea in that upper teapot, but you can always mix it with the boiling water that's still in that lower teapot to make it less dark and to make it a little bit lighter.
Are Argentina tango dancers in Turkey drinking tea at milongas?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Are Argentina tango dancers in Turkey drinking tea at milongas?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not familiar with milongas.
Yes. And then we have a comment that states that sometimes this person puts lemon in tea.
Yep.
And that's all the questions for right now.
Okay, so let's go on to the last section. So if you are interested, if you go to Turkey, where are some places that you can visit? Well, it's very interesting that one of the lovers of Istanbul was the Frenchman Pierre Loti, as you see here in this picture. He was a complete Turkophile. He lived in the Eyüp district of Istanbul and loved this particular hillside overlooking the Golden Horn. He loved it so much and lived in the area that over time they created the Pierre Loti Tea Garden. So this is one of the places that I would recommend. It's much easier to get to today, and of course it doesn't look like that today, but it's up the Golden Horn, and it's the Pierre Loti Tea Garden. I think they serve over 1,000 glasses of tea every day. Again, if you do go, remember, you want to take your own food and snacks, because typically tea gardens in Turkey just serve tea or coffee. But highly recommend Pierre Loti Tea Garden. When they did a survey in Turkey of some of the most popular tea gardens, Pierre Loti consistently ranked at the top of the list. Another place you can go if you want to really enjoy that high, 5 o'clock tea is, of course, one of the most beautiful places in Istanbul, which is the Turan Palace. You'll see a tea serving here. Very interesting history of the Turan Palace. It went from being a palace to it burned down. One of the Ottoman sultans was locked up in the palace for a while, and then after all this effort of building it, he didn't want to live there because it felt damp. It was abandoned, and then it was bought by Kempinski Hotels and turned into the luxury hotel that it is today. I would highly recommend, if you're in Istanbul and want a great view of the Bosphorus, to go to 5 o'clock tea at the Turan. And of course, there are now, to appeal to the younger generation, perhaps to even counter some of the Starbucks culture, there are some modern tea houses that have opened in Istanbul. This is in the Karaköy district. It's called Dem, which means steep in Turkish, and you can enjoy traditional tea there. I think they're also making some of their own blends in addition to other drinks. So those are probably my top 3 within Istanbul. Of course, any city or town that you go to in Turkey is most likely going to have a tea house or a tea garden or a cafe where you can enjoy tea. If you're interested in visiting some of the places that I've talked to today, obviously Istanbul, the Samovar producing region, northeast of Ankara, close to Samsun. We talked a little bit about Amasya, as well as Vezirköprü. So if you want to get one of those samovars for yourself, those are the 2 places to go to. And if you're interested in seeing the tea producing region, you want to head up to the Black Sea. So it really starts from Trabzon, and if you head east all the way to the Georgian border, as you see here from Trabzon to Artvin, that is really where the tea is cultivated and produced. It's a completely different geography, very green, hilly, rains a lot. In fact, one thing I forgot to mention, the thing that's different about the tea that is grown in Turkey compared to India or Sri Lanka or even China is that the tea in Turkey receives the most snowfall of any of the tea producing countries. And for that reason, it's considered a little bit healthier. There's organic tea. A lot of the farmers or the sharecroppers do not use any pesticides or fertilizers in the production of that tea. And the fact that those bushes get snow in the winter just adds to kind of the quality of their tea. Okay. If you'd like more information or to follow some of the updates and get news about my book, 2 places you can go. Some of my former publications are on my website at teainturkey.com. So if you'd like to read some of the articles that I've written for both Turkish or some of the American magazines, you can find them on my website. And I do post updates to my Facebook page, Tea in Turkey. Okay. Shayla, do we have any other questions?
Are there any famous tea houses or gardens throughout Anatolia that you would recommend?
There is one in Manisa, which is, you'll see over here, just north of Izmir. Now the tea there, someone asked earlier about whether there are different blends. There is a tea house there. The name of it escapes me right now, but they make tea by combining, I think, over 20 or 30 different herbs and spices and different types of plants. So that is one place, and I can certainly send the name. Unfortunately, it escapes me right now. That's one. There are, if you go to Kars, which is close to the Georgian border, there are lots of tea houses. If any of you have read Orhan Pamuk's novel Snow, he refers to the tea houses of Kars in his book. Throughout the rest of Anatolia, there aren't any that come to mind as having, you know, gained fame over time. But any town that you go to, I would ask the locals for the most famous tea house, and there's most likely to be one that they will point you to.
Are there any organized tea tours in the country?
There are tours to the Black Sea region. As far as I know, there are not any that focus strictly on tea. But if you do take advantage of any of the tours to the Black Sea region, they will most likely stop in Rize. You can have tea at the tea garden that is very close to or adjacent to the Tea Institute there, and you can experience tea that way. One thing that you'll find is, you know, as Turks, we pay a lot of attention to and give a lot of importance to hospitality. And so if you're driving along the Black Sea region and you see a family picking or harvesting their tea, if you stop and talk to them, most likely they will welcome you into their home. They'll probably make you tea. And so I think anybody going, you could probably create your own little impromptu tea tour. The people of the region are very friendly. Some of the women that I met who work in those fields, some of the smartest, most resourceful women I've certainly met, and I'm sure they would welcome you with open arms and be willing to share their stories and their family stories of how tea is so important to their livelihoods.
What is the typical number of glasses of tea consumed a day per person in Turkey?
Well, you saw the statistic earlier. It was, you know, close to 1,700 cups per year, I think was the number. Let me go back to our statistics. Those pounds. I think it's, I think 1,300 cups per year, if I'm not mistaken. The interesting thing is that Turks drink tea throughout the day. We drink it at breakfast. We drink it, you know, in offices. If you go into offices, they'll most likely have the tea server there. When I worked in Turkey for 4 years, at 4 o'clock, the tea server would come around for kind of that afternoon tea. But, you know, you can have maybe 4 to 5 glasses of tea a day. Now they are the small glasses, so it's not like we're drinking big mugs of tea. In the eastern regions of Turkey, so Erzurum and that traditional tea house that I showed, sometimes men will drink 15, 20 glasses of tea a day. Now that contrasts to coffee. We don't typically drink Turkish coffee, although it's so important. And we have one of our colleagues who's focusing on Turkish coffee culture. We drink coffee maybe once or twice a day, but tea is really consumed throughout the entire day.
What are the health benefits of drinking tea?
There's a lot of them. Obviously, a green tea is healthier than black tea because it's higher in the antioxidants. I'm a little wary of giving, health advice, but, tea is good for you, assuming that you don't have it to the point where you're having so much caffeine in your body that it's a detriment to your health. But certainly, especially if you drink some of the herbal teas, when my book comes out, the herbal tea section is really about the health benefits of each of those teas. In Turkey, we drink a lot of sage tea. We drink linden tea as some of the more healthier drinks. Overall, though, even as we've seen here in the United States, there's a big focus on tea as the healthier alternative to coffee.
What is the caffeine content in tea per cup?
That's a really good question. I would have to check on that. I don't have that off the top of my head. One thing that I've done as part of this project is really focused more on the social aspects of tea in Turkey and not a lot on, caffeine content and some of the more kind of, economic statistics around it. I think it's probably less than coffee, but the exact content, I'm afraid I don't know that statistic.
Okay. Where there aren't any more questions, thank you very much for this very informative and insightful presentation about tea. I know I learned a lot about tea in some great places in Turkey to get a samovar and to have tea in general. I would also like to thank you for your time as well in organizing the presentation. Thank you for everyone for participating, and have a safe and great evening.
Thank you.